Hi, my name is Jeff Oberl. I am the Training and Development Manager here for Cadden Community Management. Tonight we're going to learn kind of tips and tricks about being a board member and serving your homeowners association. So this is a good session for people that may be new to the board or maybe just want a little refresher on different areas of being a director. Tonight's session will be about 1 hour. I'll try to hold my word to that and get you out of here at 6:30 today. This is not legal advice, and I am not an attorney. Again, just simple tricks to help you in your role within your community. A little bit of background about myself. I've been with Cadden Management for almost 9 years now. I have been in the HOA industry for over 20 years. I've held various roles from starting out as a compliance inspector to being a portfolio manager, an on-site manager of a large-scale community, and now our training and development manager here at Cadden. So hopefully I can impart some wisdom onto you at this point. You will notice that everybody is on mute tonight, but you do have access to your chat. So please, if you have a question, you think of something along the way, please use the chat. I will try to keep an eye on it during the session. If I can break away and answer that question, then I will. Otherwise, we'll cover them at the end of our talk tonight. If you think of something afterwards, please email me, email your manager directly. We'd be happy to follow up with you. And if you would like a copy of tonight's information emailed to you, please let me know in the chat as well. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to talk about tonight are your governing documents. Now, governing documents, they're going to be all the things that you need to give you all the information about how to run your association. What are your roles and responsibilities? What are the rules and regulations of your community that need to be enforced for all of your members? Now, we're going to cover all of these different items, but we're going to cover them in an order that their hierarchy, all right? Because sometimes, unfortunately, they're going to conflict with each other. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, we need to know which one will be superior to the other. So you'll see on the top of this list, we're going to have state and federal and local law. It's going to state there that many, but not all, laws are going to be superior to your association laws. I would say 99% of the time, they probably will overrule any of your specific community documents, but it's not always the case. If there's ever a question about that, talk to your manager, talk to your legal counsel just to be sure. But good rule of thumb is if there's a law about it, it probably supersedes your rules. Sometimes we have laws that were put into place that maybe associations years ago didn't really have anything in their documents about. So maybe it's in the absence of a rule on this particular topic. This is what your rule now is type of language. However, usually it's regardless of what your rules are, this is now how you are going to operate. So we will be sending out information here in the coming months about expected changes or voted on changes in state law and how that's going to impact homeowners associations. So keep an eye out for that in your email. We usually have a guest speaker on that to go over all of the aspects of how any new state laws are going to impact association management. All right, so moving into your community-specific documents. The first and most important in this hierarchy is your recorded plat or your plat map of your association. Now, it's not something necessarily you may look to for day-to-day governance, but it's important to know that it's at the top of this hierarchy. This is what's originally developed by the builder of the association, sets out your basic lot lines, where are the property lines for the homeowners, the common areas, etc. It will give you some detail about, are these private streets or are they public streets, maybe some setbacks, some utility locations, those types of things can be found there. If you haven't seen your official plat map, I'd encourage you to take a look at it. You might need a magnifying glass or at least be able to zoom in on a PDF because there's a lot of fine print, especially on the cover page. But you'll find some good information there. Believe it or not, we've even found a parking rule or parking regulation on a plat map where every homeowner was entitled to 2 on-street parking spots, which really threw that association for a loop when they were trying to ban on-street parking because their plat map said each homeowner was entitled to on-street parking. So we had to rethink the approach for that particular community. The next one is probably the one you think about the most when you think about governing documents for a community. That's your declaration or your CC&Rs. Now, CC&R stands for Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. That restrictions word is probably the one that most homeowners know or maybe voice their concern about, because we're restricting the use of that land, of your property, right? Those are things like you can't have, a shed in the backyard. These are the plants you can and cannot plant. This is how wide your driveway can be. All these different restrictions that we're placing on the property. That's not all the CC&Rs talk about. CC&Rs are going to give us good information about the maintenance responsibilities of your community. What is the association going to maintain, and what is the homeowner's responsibility to maintain? Right? That's pretty straightforward for most associations that are single-family homes. If it's on your property, it's probably your responsibility as the homeowner to take care of. If it's on common area, like a pool area or a clubhouse, maybe an entryway, it's typically the association's responsibility through the board to maintain. It gets a little bit more complicated in townhome settings and condominium settings. So if you have a condo or a townhome, I encourage you, please take a good look at the maintenance responsibilities of your documents to really have a good understanding of if something should break or there's a leak or whatever it may be, who's responsible for what in those repairs. Your CC&Rs are also going to give you as a board guidance about assessment rates. How much can you as a board change your assessment rate from year to year? Now, we are out of budget season, but before you know it, we're going to be right back into it. But you're going to have to start thinking about, do we need an assessment increase? And if so, what is our limitations as a board to be able to increase from this year to next year? And will that be enough to meet our obligations? Your CC&Rs are going to say that you as a board can raise it maybe 10% from the last year to the next year. And if you need to go beyond that, it should give you some information about what vote you need to have of your membership. Right? How many of your homeowners need to vote to give you the authority to raise the assessments to a higher level, maybe 20%. So as you get closer to budget season and you're thinking about raising assessments, that's a good area to look at. What is your limitation in that area? CC&Rs are also going to touch on insurance requirements. I bring this up because when your insurance comes up for renewal, I encourage you to make sure that whoever's given you a proposal, let's say that instead of just renewing with your current company, you're going out to bid. Whoever's going out to bid, or even your current carrier, make sure that they have your CC&Rs so that they build that policy specific to your community. Yes, a lot of it's very similar. It's kind of boilerplate for a lot of HOA policies of what's going to be covered. But it's good to know that your agent or your broker is going to be building that policy to meet your specific needs, because they all vary slightly. So be sure that they're asking for that and it's being provided. Now, past the CC&Rs, we have our Articles of Incorporation. Again, like your plat map, probably not something you look at a whole lot for your day-to-day governance, but it's important to know that it sits right above your bylaws in this hierarchy. The reason I state that is because it covers a little bit of the same information as your bylaws, which we'll talk about next. Now, the Articles of Incorporation is what's first recorded to set out the purpose of your corporation, your association. Now, yes, you are an official corporation, a nonprofit or not-for-profit corporation in the eyes of Arizona, which comes with having to register your names as directors with the Arizona Corporation Commission. There's an annual report that we file. There's a due date for every association that varies, and we will register your names with the Arizona Corporation Commission as a director for your community. Now, your articles will cover a little bit about the board of directors and how it's created, or how it's, I guess, oh my goodness, how many people will be on your board. Usually it'll say who the original board members are, and then it'll give some parameters about how many people should be on your board. Usually you'll see language in there about no less than 3 members and maybe no more than 5 members on your board. Now, when we get ready for annual meetings, we often look to your bylaws, because that's kind of the how to run your organization document. It describes the behavior of your corporation. How do you get directors? How are they elected from your membership? Once they're elected, what are their roles? The different officers of your board, what are their responsibilities and obligations to the community? And it will also describe the board of directors again, just like your articles did. We'll often say that the number of board members should be, again, no less than this number, no more than another number. And usually we'll even say, and should never be an even number, because we always want to make sure we have an odd number of board members. So there's never a tie vote. Now, this is where we see some of the conflict. Because sometimes you'll see your articles will say no less than 3, no more than 5, but your bylaws may come around and say no less than 3, no more than 7. In that case, we need to make sure we're going by your articles with the restriction to 5. If there's ever a conflict like that, I encourage you to work with your manager, work with your board and your attorney to amend one of those documents so that they match. Avoid that confusion moving forward. Oftentimes, bylaws can be amended by a simple majority vote of the board of directors. Not always the case. You'll see amendment regulations or directions within every one of these documents. So be sure that you have the authority as a board to do that. Or it might be worth going out and getting the association to vote on it, just to clarify that point moving forward. Now, the next one on this list is your board resolutions or rules and regulations. It's at the bottom of this list, but it's not to say it's not important. However, it's all these items that can be created and put into place by the board. All right, usually your CC&Rs or your bylaws are going to give the board of directors authority to create reasonable rules and regulations on certain areas of governance. So for example, you may be given the authority to create a reasonable rule about parking restrictions, as I talked about before. So you as a board have now the authority to define what that looks like for your community. Do you want to ban on-street parking? Maybe you only want to ban on-street parking between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. No parking in the front yard landscaping. Whatever that looks like for your community, you've been given the authority by one of these higher documents to create that. However, if there's no mention of a restriction or maybe the potential restriction in one of these higher documents, you as a board can't just create one out of thin air. An example I like to use is a number of years ago when short-term rentals and Airbnbs or VRBOs became very popular and sometimes troublesome in communities where you would get a new rental every weekend and perhaps there were parties and loud noises and music, and boards wanted to restrict that. Right? They wanted to say, okay, you can't rent it to a new person every week. You can only rent for no less than 30 days or no less than 60 days, 90 days, whatever it looked like for that community. However, they could only do that if their higher documents gave them the authority to do that. If there was no mention of rental restrictions or any sort of lease restrictions in the CC&Rs, then the board really didn't have the authority to create that. So if you have an idea about a rule you want to create, make sure you're looking at your higher documents to be sure you have that authority to define what that looks like, and perhaps double check with your manager or your legal counsel if there's ever any question about that. Okay, let's jump into the next section here. It's all about the role of the HOA board of directors. All right. When I meet with the board or a board kind of one-on-one, I like to start with what are the strengths and weaknesses of you as directors, and what are the strengths and weaknesses of your association as a whole? Now, individual strengths and weaknesses, that's pretty straightforward. We can all think about what our backgrounds are, what do we bring to the table, and how can we leverage that for the betterment of our association? All right, perhaps you come to the board with a financial background. You're great with numbers. Maybe the treasurer's role is a great position for you to help and advise your board. Perhaps you're really good with public speaking and delegating and making sure projects are run through to completion. Maybe a president's role would be great for you. All right, talk about what you all, like I said, bring to this table so that you can put the people in the right place to succeed as a board. Now, when we think about your strengths and weaknesses as a community, that's a bit different. Now, we're all going to have a different perspective of what we think the goals should be for our community. But if you think about maybe the age of your community, are you a brand new community, newly transitioned from developer to homeowner control? Maybe you need to think about what rules do we need to put in place? How do we want to govern this community and our homeowners. Maybe we need to think about setting up savings accounts and reserve accounts so future boards have the funds they need to maintain and replace the assets of the community. Perhaps you're an aged community where it's time to start repairing and replacing assets. Hopefully, past boards set you up for success and you have the money that you need so you can start doing those projects. So it really depends on where you are as a community and where you want to put your focus on as a board. Overall, your goal as a board is to promote this sense of community, and you're going to do that through protecting the architectural integrity of the community and maintaining the common elements of your association and keeping everyone informed. All right, if you're doing those things, you're really going to protect and hopefully enhance the property values of your association. Yes, communicate. Not everybody's going to come to your board meetings, but they should know what's going on in the association. So maybe a quick newsletter, maybe a little email notice that could be drafted by the board secretary, maybe board president, to give everyone a clue as to what the board voted on, what changes or upcoming events are going to take place. Now, the board of directors. I touched on this a little bit ago, but you are official directors of a corporation in the eyes of the state of Arizona. All right, like I said, we're filing your names with the Arizona Corporation Commission. With that, you are governed by not only your governing documents for your community, you're governed by association-specific laws like the Planned Communities Act or the Condominium Act, and you also are governed by the Nonprofit Corporation Act. All right, so we'll talk a little bit how that comes into play and maybe some voting procedures a little bit down the road. Now, again, I know I'm going through the information a little bit fast in the interest of time, but please, if you want a copy of these slides, let me know in the chat. I'd be happy to email them to you, or you can email me separately afterwards too. I'd like to spend a little bit of time next to talk about the officer positions of your board. And before I start talking about specific officer positions, I want to talk about the difference in terminology between director and officer. I know it seems like common sense, but these terms get used a lot in your governing documents and can get a little bit confused. Now, your bylaws will oftentimes say, well, let me back up. Let me define them first, and then I'll give my example. So everybody on the board is a director. Okay, you are all elected or maybe appointed to serve on this board, and you are all a director, hence the term board of directors. Now, you as directors then get to decide who's going to hold an office. All right, who's going to get a title and extra responsibilities on this board? Who's going to be president, treasurer, secretary, vice president, etc. All right, those are officer positions. All right, you're still a director, but you also have an officer title. Now, I bring this up because there's oftentimes language in bylaws that states the board of directors may remove an officer by a board vote. All right, sometimes that is misread as the board of directors can remove a board member by a simple vote. All right, you're not doing that. All right, you are removing their office. You're removing their title. Let's say, for example, you have a treasurer. The treasurer hasn't been there for the last 3 meetings. Maybe there's another board member that wants to take that position on. Okay, well, if you have that language in your bylaws, you as a board can reorganize your officers. You can say, okay, this person is no longer the treasurer, and we make a motion to appoint this person as treasurer. All right, you're removing that office and reappointing it. You're not removing them as a director. They're still on the board. Okay. Now, let's talk about what those officer positions are. Now, these are general terms. Look to your bylaws for specific information about your community, but there's usually a common thread through all of them. All right, your president's role. You're the CEO of this corporation. You're going to be our main point of contact from management. Unless otherwise defined, there's sometimes a different point of contact, but it's usually the president as our day-to-day contact. You are going to preside over the board meetings. What does that mean? It means calling it to order, means moving the agenda along, asking for input. We'll talk a bit more in the next couple slides about what does an effective what does an effective board meeting look like? All right. And that is really going to be the job of the president and the manager to keep that board meeting on track. You as the president get to define what the agenda is for your board meeting. You can solicit input from your fellow directors. You can solicit input from the manager, but you ultimately get to decide what is the board going to talk about and define what the agenda is. You are also likely going to be the signer of any contracts or any agreements that are approved by the board. Sometimes we'll also ask the secretary to co-sign an agreement, but it should never be your manager that's signing the contract for the association. Let's say that the board of directors approves a new landscape company. We are going to send that contract to you, likely electronically, to sign and execute on behalf of the association. It's not a contract between the landscaper and Cadden. It's a contract between the landscape company and the association. So it makes sense that an officer of the association will execute that contract. Next would be your vice president role. You get to do all those fun things when the president's not available. Otherwise, it's usually pretty sparse as far as responsibilities go. And for that reason, we often see the vice president also serve as the chair of your architectural or your design review committee. It's not mandated, unless it is mandated in your documents, but it's not a state law that requires that. But it's usually what we see because there's not a lot of extra responsibility in that role. I will say that your architectural committee, it is mandated by state law that it's chaired by a board member. The rest of the members of that architectural committee can be homeowners, other board members, maybe even residents, renters. Look to your documents to be sure. But it is state law that that particular committee must be chaired by a board member, not necessarily the vice president. All right, next will be secretary. You're the custodian of the records. What does that mean? You're going to make sure that the records of the association are being kept in accordance with your records retention policy, in accordance with state law. You're keeping homeowners informed. You're sending out announcements to the community in accordance with your governing documents. If you remember going up to your annual meeting, you received information in advance. You received hopefully a call for candidates or a call for nominations. Who's interested in being on the board? We have to send that out in a certain amount of time before your meeting. We have to send out your ballots and the official notice of your annual meeting. Your bylaws are going to describe what that looks like. It's usually no less than 15 days, no more than 50 days prior to your annual meeting. Making sure these different parameters are met really falls to the association secretary. And of course, keeping the minutes of your meetings. All right, what was decided at these board meetings? Document that. That is association corporate record forever. And those should be kept as such. Now, the treasurer, you're in charge of the funds. Okay, you are going to be paying the bills of the association, collecting all the assessments from your fellow homeowners, making sure your budget's prepared and approved by the board, that your taxes are being filed, your year-end financial report is being completed and published to your association members, that your monthly financial reports are being reviewed and shared with your board and approved by the board, and then ultimately shared with your homeowners so that, again, they're staying informed. They know what's going on in the community. Now, usually after your bylaws describe all of these responsibilities of the different officer positions, it will usually say that you can also hire a management company and share those responsibilities with us. All right, so we'll talk in the next couple pages about what does that partnership look like. But before we move on to that, we're going to talk about the fiduciary relationship and responsibility you as board members now have to your fellow association members. All right, so the fiduciary, you've probably heard that term right in the financial world. You have a fiduciary for your investments and all those different aspects. They have your best interest in mind when they're giving you advice on different areas to invest in. It's not unsimilar to what you're doing. You have the best interest of your homeowners in mind when you're making decisions as a board member. Okay, I like to read right from this, a couple of these lines. It says it requires the members of the board to act in good faith and in the best interest of the members of the association. It means that the board members must exercise due care and diligence when acting for the community, and it requires you to act within the scope of your authority. Okay, that just boils down to do what is best for the association, perhaps set your personal interests aside if that ever conflicts with what you think is best for all. Act within the scope of your authority. Know your governing documents. Know what your limitations are, right? And act within that authority limitation. It also states here that the board's duties must be performed with the care and responsibility that an ordinary, prudent person would exercise under similar circumstances. Okay? If someone else was in your shoes as a board member, if they had all the same information that you had, would it be reasonable to assume that they would make a similar decision as you, right? I'm not asking, we're not asking, your homeowners are not asking you to be experts in all these areas that you're going to be, asked to provide input on or vote on. For instance, you may be asked to vote on asphalt maintenance for your community. If you have private roadways, this is a big topic, and it's a large number or a large amount of money that you may have to invest in your community. And it's probably an area of maintenance that you've never thought of before, in your day-to-day life. Ask questions. All right, get the information from your manager. Get the information from the vendors that are providing you bids. Why are you recommending this? Why is this better than the other product being suggested? Feel comfortable and confident in the decision you're making. Okay, don't just vote yes or no because your neighboring board member voted yes or no. Do the research, ask the questions, feel confident in your vote. All right. So again, I know I'm going to move past these bullet points here, but please, again, make sure that you request these by email so that we can go over them, or you can ask your manager about those as well. Now, let's talk about our partnership with you. All right, so we just talked about all of these responsibilities of you as officers or the board in general. All right, our basic role is to enforce the rules and regulations and all the policies on behalf of the association. All right, yes, we're partnering with you as the board. We're taking direction from you as the board, but we're really enforcing them on behalf of the entire association. Now, if we look at these bullet points, a lot of these are going to sound very similar to those roles and responsibilities that we talked about for the various officer positions. But it's kind of good to know how these things will intertwine with the management and the board. Now, we're going to keep and maintain the files and records of the association. Like I said, they're minutes of the organization. They need to be kept forever. Financial statements need to be kept for a number of years, and so on. Long gone are the days of banker boxes of, hard copy files being shifted from one secretary's closet to the other secretary's closet or garage. All right, all of that is usually shared with us. Most of it's digitized now and scanned and saved, and no longer do you have to worry about, okay, well, which past board member has this document? Where is it? Did it get lost somewhere, from one board member to the other? It's usually shared with us to document and store for you. We're going to assist with the budget process. All right, that's the treasurer's responsibility typically. It just makes sense, right, that we're going to take usually the first draft approach and share that with you as a board treasurer or perhaps the full board right off the bat. We're aware of the industry trends. We're in contact with your vendors. We have the management software to prepare the draft for you. Let us do that and partner with you. If there's questions along the way, recommendations, fine tuning, that's definitely part of your role as the board. It's ultimately your decision of what the budget's going to ultimately look like. All right, but let us take the first draft and provide that to you. We're going to complete the association mailings. We're going to organize all of that for you. Again, secretary's role to really make sure it's being done in accordance with your bylaws. However, we're going to do the bulk of the work on that. I will, it's as easy as a quick little email announcement that goes out to your membership about, hey, don't forget that the trash collection cycle is switching because there was a holiday this week, or sharing the newsletter with everybody, or maybe an amendment vote that needs to take place and sent out to all of your homeowners. So it could be a very simple announcement or it could be a very detailed announcement. We'll help you out with those too. the back office work for a sale of a home in your community. There's a lot of paperwork that takes place and gets transferred during that time. So I'm sure you remember when you bought your property, there was a lot of paperwork, not only from title, but a lot of it came from the HOA side as well. Usually we're contacted by the title agency to say there is an upcoming sale. We have to provide certain pieces of information to title to share with the buyer and seller in that transaction. We're asked to verify things like, are there any violations known on that property? That buyer should know if that house is in violation and needs to be painted so that they don't get ownership of that property. And then in 2 weeks, they're notified that, hey, the house needs to be painted by, a month from now. All right, they should be aware of that so they can negotiate that at the time of sale. We also need to inform them of things like, are there any lawsuits? Is there litigation going on in the community? Are the assessments paid in full? Are there special assessments that may be due? Those types of things get shared at that time. We also provide them with the governing documents of the association so they know what they're getting into, quote unquote, by buying into this association. What is going to be required of them as a homeowner and member of this community? We're going to pay the bills of the association. The contractor typically will send the invoices directly to us. We will process them through our management software, verify that the invoice matches the contract, that the work was ultimately performed. So sometimes we may have to reach out to you as board members because you're there on property to say, hey, was that tree trimming project done and completed and satisfactory to the board before we pay for it? But we're going to take the lead on all of that process. We're going to coordinate schedules with vendors and contractors. We're going to go solicit bids for you. We may work with you to really define what bids we're going to get, creating a request for proposal for larger projects. What exactly are you looking to accomplish? Perhaps it is that paving project. What does that look like? What type of paving maintenance are we looking for? That way, when the bids come back, they're more of apples to apples comparisons rather than we get 6 different opinions and different approaches for you as a board to decipher. And ultimately, once you approve a project, we're going to help schedule that and announce it to your membership as needed. We're going to work with you and your treasurer in particular to make sure financials are processed. We're going to provide you with a monthly financial. If you're new to the board, you may not have seen these yet, but you will receive an email with a PDF file attached. You'll also have access to it through the portal. And it's going to give you a lot of information, more information than you probably would have seen as a homeowner. You're going to receive a summary page, a balance sheet. You're going to receive a budget comparison report so you know what you've spent compared to your budget, what you thought you were going to spend, and what the variance is, both in a monthly comparison and a year-to-date comparison. So that way you can really stay on top of your finances for your community. We're going to work with you to select a CPA as needed to make sure your taxes are filed and that your year-end reporting is done as well. Once the board ultimately approves your monthly financial, we share a condensed version of that with all of your homeowners. All right, it removes any sort of confidential information. I neglected or forgot to state that your board packet will also include delinquency reports, prepaid reports, who has paid ahead on their assessments. That type of information would be removed from what's shared with your homeowners. And then, yes, we will also have constant communication with your homeowners. And a lot of it revolves around 2 things, usually, all right? Their assessments, all right, what does their ledger say? Getting them caught up, perhaps, on assessment rates. Maybe they missed an assessment increase from last year to this year. What does that look like, and how did that impact them? And also reminders about compliance issues. All right. Yes, we do tour the association on whatever frequency your contract calls for, and we have to send those reminder notices out to your members. You may not be aware that you have to pull the weeds in your yard. You have 10 days to get it under compliance. Okay. We usually get a phone call, and we have to explain that we enforce this equally amongst everybody. Just because you got this notice and your neighbor also has weeds, they probably also got a letter, okay? We can't disclose the details with you, but just know we enforce everything equally. And we appreciate their attention to the letter they received. All right, so let's move into my favorite topic, effective board meetings. Let's see, I see a few comments in here before we go here. What's the rule of thumb for cash reserves? That's a great question, Dwight. If I have time at the end, I'll cover that. Otherwise, I'll follow up with you. And then a couple requests here for the slides. Okay, just want to make sure. All right, running an effective board meeting. Know and understand your board's responsibilities as described in your bylaws. Right? Again, kind of a broken record speech you might hear through the rest of tonight. Your personal interests are secondary when you are acting as a board member. Okay, set that aside when you're voting and evaluating things as a board member. It's a business meeting. You're a corporation. All right. Your board meeting is really the time for you as a board to make decisions. You technically, shouldn't be discussing items, shouldn't be voting on items outside of a board meeting. Emergency situations call for unanimous written consent type of votes that we can talk about in a little bit. But for the most part, the open meeting law in the state of Arizona is pretty strict. If you as a board have a decision to make, you need to make it at a board meeting. It allows all of your homeowners the opportunity to hear what decisions you're making and provide their input along the way. All right. It is a business meeting, and because of that, you should set your room up, set your room up for success. And again, we'll kind of talk about setting the tone here in point number 2. Got ahead of myself. So act as the fiduciary and have that corporate versus community balance. All right, let's jump right into it. Set the tone. Most of our communities are meeting online now. Okay, if you're meeting online, make sure you're set up for success there. Have a comfortable area where you can have minimal distractions. That your computer or your phone, your tablet, whatever you're participating on is charged and ready. That your camera is operational if you're going to join by camera. If you're meeting in person, make sure you get there a little bit early. Make sure you're setting that room up for success for a board meeting. Now, there's a difference between an annual meeting and a board meeting. Your annual meeting is more of a presentation. All right, you typically set up a head table in front of all of your homeowners where all of the board members will sit facing rows of homeowner chairs. All right, you're presenting results of the election. You're presenting the results of what happened over the last year, and not necessarily decisions being made by you as directors. Now, when you have a board meeting, I encourage you to set your room up differently. Maybe move those tables inward so that everyone can sit around one large table and look each other in the eye and have conversations that way, rather than looking down a table of 5 to 7, maybe even 9 members to have a conversation that way. It's just not conducive to having a good discussion and an effective meeting there. You should still have plenty of seating for homeowners that wish to join you as well, whether it's at that main table or maybe seats around the area so they can observe and participate when it's their turn. Know and be aware of laws that affect you. The Nonprofit Corporation Act, Condominium Act, that open meeting law that we talked about here, and also the Nonprofit Corporation Act. Now, the Nonprofit Corporation Act, really the biggest thing that we get from that is how to vote in an emergency situation. We call it this action in lieu vote, where if you cannot wait for your next board meeting and you cannot wait a 48-hour period to call a board meeting and you have to vote on something, you can do so by unanimous written consent. That can be by email. Unanimous written consent needs to be, much like it sounds, but I'll define it here. If you have a 5-member board, all 5 of your board members have to reply and all 5 of you have to say yes. Okay? If 4 out of the 5 say yes and the 5th person doesn't respond, it doesn't pass. All 5 have to respond. If 4 say yes, 1 says no, of course, that also is not unanimous. All right, so don't wait for a simple majority. Make sure everybody votes and everybody says yes before you take action. All right, that's different than a vote at a board meeting. A vote at a board meeting is a simple majority of the board members present. And that's going to be your approval threshold there. right? So again, that's where that nonprofit corporation that kind of steps in and gives us some guidance in the HOA world. Implement a residence time. This is probably an area where a lot of associations can really save yourself some time and maybe frustration at your board meeting. Now, homeowners input. There's two different differentiations here. A lot of times we see on agendas an open period for homeowners to participate. It's often called your homeowner input, maybe call to the audience, where homeowners are given the opportunity to address the board on any topic they wish. Now, if you have that on your agenda, that's perfectly okay. We actually think it's best practice to have that on your agenda so that homeowners, if they choose to join you, they have an opportunity to present to you. If you have it on your agenda, we also recommend that you have some parameters and some rules to it. And I usually print it right on my agenda. It'll say open forum. Homeowners are permitted 2 minutes to address the board of directors on any topic you wish, right? And we're going to clock it. All right, I'm going to have a timer on my phone, and as soon as we have one homeowner start, I push go. When the 2 minutes are up, and it's very audible, everyone can hear the ringer when it goes off. We thank you for your input. We move on to the next person. All right. It may be 3 minutes for your board. It may be 1 minute for your board. Whatever it is and you agree upon, be strict about how you enforce it. All right. Be equal and fair, regardless of what type of input you're receiving. Let's see here. Again, you're not required, unless it's specifically in your documents, to have that on your agenda. Again, we think it's best practice, but you can remove it if it's getting, abused and that's overtaking your board meetings. Now, you are required to solicit input from your homeowners before you vote on something. Okay. If you, let's say, make a motion to change landscape companies and it's been seconded, you as a board have discussed it and you're ready to vote. Before you vote, the chair of the meeting should open it up to any homeowners and say, homeowners present, do you have any comments on the motion at hand? We're going to give you 30 seconds to address this topic. All right, homeowner 1, homeowner 2, homeowner 3, specific to that motion, not on anything you wish. Then you as a board can vote. All right, that is now required by state law. You're not required to have it on your agenda by state law. You're required to have it before every vote. Okay. All right. Begin on time and set goals for the duration of your meeting. All right. Board president, typically when you're setting up the agenda, make sure you're setting that agenda up for success. Usually board meetings are anywhere from maybe 30 minutes to an hour, potentially up to 2 hours, right? Our contract calls for that. If you're getting much past 2 hours, maybe even past an hour and a half, you start to maybe lose some interest. You start to maybe lose some engagement from your board members and your homeowners present. And if you go past 2 hours, you may even start getting homeowners that don't want to come to board meetings and don't want to participate in future meetings. All right, so make sure your board meetings are set up in a way that they're achievable and that maybe they don't run on for too long. That way you can encourage other homeowners to participate, observe, and maybe even participate on the board or committees along the way. Let's see, if that becomes an issue, let's say that you have a board and you historically run over your time allotment. Maybe you're 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours. Believe it or not, I've been to a 4-hour board meeting, okay? If you're consistently running over time, I would recommend, 1, look at your agenda. Is everything necessary on it? Are there things that can be removed or tabled for future board meetings? Also, consider setting up timed agendas where call to order should be 1 minute. Verification of quorum should be 1 minute. Approval of minutes should be 2 minutes. Approval of financials should be 10 minutes. All right. Set some expectations for the different areas and reports on your agenda so that you can keep track of it and keep the meeting moving. Now, use a preparation strategy. Use your agenda, all right? Always, definitely. You're actually now required to publish your agenda 48 hours in advance of your board meeting. We were always required, or it feels like always required, it's been so long, to give advance notice of your board meetings. We have to give 48 hours notice to your membership of any time the board's going to meet, whether it's an open meeting or an executive session. And if you were going to meet an executive session, we have to tell the homeowners why. What of these protected items under the law are we going to talk about? We don't have to give you specifics. We're not going to tell you what lots we're talking about and why. All right, but we may say that we're going to have executive session because we're talking about legal advice or delinquencies, all right, whatever it may be. We're now also required to share the agenda of the board meeting 48 hours prior to the meeting. So when you're setting that up, and once it's published, you can't change it, all right, because the expectation now as a homeowner is, I've seen what you're going to talk about, and now I'm going to make a decision whether I'm going to attend this meeting or not based on what I've seen on the agenda. All right, if you vote on something that's not on that agenda, then it could be challenged down the road too. All right, so make sure you're setting your agenda up properly and that it's being published. It must be provided or made available to your homeowners. Receive your information packets in advance. All right, we always shoot for 3 to 5 days prior from management to board. Once you receive that, please review the information. We're going to give you as much information as we can to be informed to make decisions at this meeting. So again, I'll keep using the reference of a landscape contract. If we have bids for landscape services, we're going to have them in that board packet. We're going to have all the information for your board meeting in the same order of events as what your agenda has lined out. So it's going to have your agendas first, the approval of your minutes. So your draft minutes will be the next document. Perhaps your financials will be next. Your manager's report will be next. And then all of your old and new business will follow in the same order that your agenda is. So it's logical as you're flipping through the pages. So do some homework, take a look at it, ask questions of your manager if you're unsure about a topic. That way we can have the information for you at the meeting to help you make your decision. All right. And let's see here. Don't get too tied up in Robert's rules. Robert's rules, if any of you have really had a meeting where you're very strict on Robert's rules, it's very difficult. There are a lot of rules and parameters. All right, so don't get too bogged down by that. But we should have some sort of structure, especially for making decisions. Now, it may be different than what you do currently, but I encourage you to maybe start to begin new business or old business items with a motion and a second first before you start discussion. A lot of boards like to introduce an agenda topic, discuss it first, make sure everybody's kind of in agreement before a motion's made. We're forming that perfect motion so we know it's going to be approved. That's not really how we should do it. We should always introduce the agenda topic. So let's say board president says new business item 1 is landscape contract. Do I have a motion from the floor? One of your board members can say, I make a motion that we approve ABC Landscape Company effective April 1st. Great. Board president says, do I have a second? Another board member seconds that motion. Now we enter into discussion. All right. We usually start with whoever made the motion. Hey, why did you make that motion? Open up discussion. Board members all around get to have input. Again, before you vote on it, we're going to ask for homeowner participation on that motion, and then you can vote. All right, just because a motion's been made and seconded and discussed doesn't mean it's going to be approved. All right, it can be voted down, it can be withdrawn, it can be modified. All right, there's a lot of different ways that that motion can be removed or modified, right? I would also say just because you second a motion doesn't mean you support the motion. You're supporting furthering discussion, okay? I make a motion that we do this. Hey, you know what? I'm not so sure about it, but I'm going to second it so we can discuss it, right? And then we move forward. All right, so it may feel a little different, all right, but I encourage you, if you haven't done that before, start trying to make your motions and seconds and discussions, and then you vote. All right, the chair of the meeting, you should act as the facilitator. Stick to the issue at hand. Homeowner input periods can really derail a meeting, and then not staying on topic can really derail a meeting, okay? If we're talking about landscape contracts, let's make sure we stay on that topic, all right? I like to use the example of, let's say we've had that motion and second to change companies, we're in discussion. Board member might say, you know what, I fully support changing because last time I was in the pool area, I noticed they didn't trim any of the landscaping around the pool, and the pool had leaves in it and it's starting to turn green. And then that turns into, you know what, I haven't seen the pool vendor in weeks. Are they even showing up anymore? And the janitorial company hasn't been cleaning the bathrooms. All right, well, hey, we're not talking about landscape anymore, right? Chair of the meeting, all right, let's reel that back in. Let's say, okay, you know what? It sounds like we might need to talk about the pool maintenance at a future meeting, but let's get back on track with the landscape discussion, okay? So again, keeping the topic in focus. Solicit input from your board members. You know, it's a little bit more difficult when you're doing a virtual meeting with Hollywood Squares here. You might not see the body language of someone having input to say. In person, it's a little bit easier. You may see them kind of, you know, uneasy in their chair, maybe antsy, they want to say something. Call on them. Say, you know, it looks like you may have some input on this topic. Would you like to share? Maintain civility. I know it kind of seems silly and kind of goes without saying, but you're not always going to be talking about nice, easy topics, okay? You may have something that's a little controversial, maybe a difficult decision that needs to be made. Make sure that we're being civil with each other in the room, okay? You're all elected there for the same reason. You're all there for the betterment and for your association. You may not all have the same viewpoint of what that looks like, okay? But you're all there for the same reason, for your association. Don't get too hung up on any particular topic. If you are just, you know, going round and round on this landscape topic and there's no decision anywhere in sight, it's okay to say, you know what, it looks like we have a lot more questions. Let's table this. Let's table it maybe to the end of the meeting if we have more time to discuss it. Let's get through the rest of it. Maybe we have to table it to the next meeting to get more information from the vendors. All right, tabling it to the end of the meeting is a great move. All right, it lets you get through everything else. And then if you have time, get back into it. All right, otherwise, move it to your next meeting. Number 9, avoid abstaining from voting. You were elected to serve on this board and to vote on the homeowner's behalf. You are one of 5. Let's say you're a board of 5. You're one of 5 people in your community that get to make a decision, that get to vote at this table. Please use your vote. Don't abstain just because it's maybe an uncomfortable decision. Gather the facts, be able to stand behind the vote you make. Now, there's a difference between abstaining and recusing yourself. If you have a conflict of interest, you must disclose that. If you're part owner of ABC Landscaping in my little made-up world, you must disclose that. Hey, before we vote, before we move forward, I'm part owner of ABC Landscape, therefore I'm going to recuse myself from this decision. You're not required to recuse, however. Okay, you're required to disclose. You may still vote. We think it's in the best interest of the association and the board to recuse in those situations, however, you're not required to. All right, at the end of your meeting, a lot of times this gets overlooked, you know, just kind of in the hurry to you know, adjourn and head home. But I think it's often nice to recap what happened. All right, what did we accomplish at this meeting? What decisions were made? And what actions need to be carried out between now and our next meeting? Thank people for attending. Okay. Hey, we had a vendor join us and they gave us some great input on this project. We had a lot of new homeowners here. Thanks so much for coming. We hope you come back next meeting. Maybe think about serving on a committee. All right. And then pack up and head home. All right. Especially if you're in-person meetings. I have seen all too often a 2-hour meeting get adjourned. And then before I know it, everyone's packing up and we're rehashing the entire agenda. We're having 2 board meetings, it feels like. All right, so your time is valuable, your volunteers, please, when it's time to adjourn, let's pack up and head home, okay? All right, let's see, I've seen a couple questions pop in. So in the interest of time here, I'm gonna kind of get through my next couple pages and hopefully jump to those. I promise there's not much more. These next pages look like a lot, but I'm only gonna highlight a few. Board member ethics. A lot of these go without saying, okay? If you have a contentious board, maybe there's something going on, there's some issues, some bad feelings perhaps on the board, it may be good to have like a board code of conduct, maybe a refresher of what these board member ethics are. So I like to share it with you just to have, if ever needed, and talk to your manager if you have that type of situation, and maybe talk about initiating a board of conduct type of policy. But I'd like to highlight a couple of these. Number 1, broken record speech. Serve the best interest of the association as a whole, regardless of your personal interests, okay? Number 8 is a good one. because you're not always going to have unanimous decisions. Okay? Always speak with one voice and support all duly adopted board decisions, even if you are in the minority of the action taken. Okay? Let's say ABC landscaping got approved, but you voted against it. Okay? And a board or a homeowner asks you maybe next week, hey, what ultimately happened? You know, are we changing landscape companies? Yep, the board decided we're doing this. We're not going to put in the side comment, if I voted against it, I think it's the worst decision ever. All right. We don't want to have that appearance of a fractured or splintered board, right? The board has decided to do this. Okay. And that's what you as a board member are going to support. All right. At the meeting, that's appropriate, right? You're going to voice your concern. You're going to voice your vote and why you think everyone should vote against it. But once that decision's made, that's what we're going to support, and that's how we're going to move forward. Okay. Keep confidential information confidential. Again, kind of goes without saying, but if you're new to the board, there may be situations that you never thought you would be made aware of as a board member in an HOA. Sometimes you'll be approached by a homeowner. Perhaps they've fallen behind on their assessments, or they have a violation for something that they haven't cured yet. They may approach you as a board for forgiveness of late fees, maybe to help them work out a payment plan for their assessments. And they may share with you that maybe they've lost their job, they've lost a loved one, there's some sort of hardship going on in their life that has put them in this position. Right? They're sharing that with you as a board to help make a decision on how and if you're going to help this homeowner. Okay? That's not for you to share with anyone else in the community. All right? I know, again, it kind of goes without saying, but sometimes maybe if there's, of a hardship going on and you're talking to a homeowner about it, it may feel like you should say, you know what, this is going on with this homeowner. We should do something. We should make a care package for him. Well, hey, how did you know about that? Oh, well, they shared it with us because we were going to waive late fees, right? So slippery slope. So be aware of the information you received and how you received it. All right, keep it confidential. Refrain from making unauthorized promises to any contractors or homeowners. All right, if you happen to meet with a vendor out on property and they're in the bidding process, stay away from language of, oh, I'm sure you'll get the bid, or when you get the proposal, let's have you do this. Ask questions, get information, stay away from any sort of those promissory types of conversations. Same thing with homeowners. All right, homeowners now know you as a board member. If they're talking to you about a project they want to do on their house and you say, wow, that sounds like a great plan. All right, they may say, well, that board member says it's a great plan. I must be able to do it. All right, hey, that sounds like a great plan, but don't forget to get architectural approval before you do anything. Okay, again, kind of sounds like worst case scenario, but I bring it up because we've seen it happen. Okay. All right, and refrain from personal attacks, harassment, threats of colleagues, residents, vendors. Again, temperatures can get hot on certain topics, so keep a level head. Board meeting minutes. I'm going to keep this page very brief, just like your minutes should be. All right, they're called board meeting minutes, not board meeting hours. All right, the purpose of your minutes are to document the time, date, and location of your meeting and any and all decisions or actions that were taken, not any and all discussions that were had. Okay, your meeting minutes should really honestly look a whole lot like your agenda. It would say new business, item 1, landscape contract, motion made and seconded to change landscape companies to ABC effective April 1, motion passed unanimously. All right, not motion was made and seconded and this person said this person doesn't like them, this person said this, all right, and ultimately it was approved, right? What was the decision? What was the action? That's all we're documenting, okay? If you keep that in mind, your minutes will be very short, very succinct, and when they're saved for years and years and years, they're not open to interpretation. The last slide here is all about directors and officers insurance claims. Now, as it says here, this is in no ranking order, but directors and officers insurance coverage is what protects you as board members. If a homeowner were ever to file suit against the association for maybe a decision that you made or an action taken by the board, your directors and officers, or you may have heard D&O insurance would step in most cases to give you some protection and some defense. That's the word I'm looking for, defense in those areas. I like to highlight just a couple of these. Again, that's not in any ranking order, but things that we've seen come up in the industry. The biggest one is usually selective enforcement, number 6. Selective enforcement, when you hear the enforcement term, you usually think of violation letters, fines, taking action in that way. But it's not necessarily always about enforcement in that way. It could be enforcing your architectural guidelines. Perhaps you approved a storage shed for one homeowner in this backyard. 2 houses down, they requested the same storage shed, but it was denied. Well, why do we approve it here and deny it here? We're selectively enforcing our architectural guidelines. All right, so be fair and consistent in all areas and decisions that you make. Number 12, deferred maintenance issues and failure to fund your reserves. When you get into budget season again, or perhaps you have a large project that's before you as a board, don't be afraid to be the board that spends the money. Don't be afraid to be the board that raises assessments. Okay? It's your fiduciary duty in another way to protect your association members by maintaining those assets and protecting future homeowners as well. Deferred maintenance, not keeping up with replacing assets, not raising your assessments to make sure you're setting enough money aside for 10, 15 years down the road when those assets need to be replaced, can do a lot of damage to the community. All right. I've seen communities where they haven't raised assessments for 10, 15, 20 years and where, I can see wearing that as a badge of honor, right? That, hey, we've kept our assessments low and, we're doing great. That is great. We have this low assessment rate, but is it really the best thing for our association? Are we meeting our operational costs, but are we also setting enough money aside to set our future selves up for success? All right, so being aware of that. A great tool that you can use for that is a reserve study. Reserve study comes in, it's a separate company. They will review and assess all of the assets of the community and typically put together a 30-year funding plan of when these assets and their useful life will run out, that you have enough money to maintain and replace them along the way. So if you don't have a reserve study yet, or if maybe you have a very outdated one, that might be a good resource for you as we start to approach your budget season in just a few months. Okay. And before we close tonight, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for joining tonight. Thank you for volunteering and serving your association. It is unfortunately oftentimes a thankless job. So let Cadden thank you on behalf of your community members and for choosing us to be a partner with you and your association. If you think of something else, please reach out. We're always here to help you, and have a wonderful evening.